The mind is a garden that listens. Every word you speak, even the ones that never leave your lips, plants something in that soil. Most people live unaware of what they've been sowing, repeating phrases like, "I can't," "It's too late," or "That's just who I am." They don't realize that repetition, more than belief, more than effort, is the sculptor of destiny. It's not the loud declarations that shape your path, but the quiet phrases murmured each morning when no one is listening. This is where transformation truly begins, in the secret rhythm of your language. Think of the human brain as a musician rehearsing the same melody every day. Each word, each thought, becomes a note in the score of your behavior. Classical learning models, from Aristotle to modern psychology, have long confirmed this. The repetition of meaningful words changes how the mind organizes decisions. The words you repeat create grooves in your attention, much like rivers carve through rock. Over time, they become channels through which your thoughts, emotions, and even financial choices begin to flow automatically. You do not decide differently. You become someone who does. In this journey, we'll uncover how, when, and why repeating the right words can alter your entire inner architecture, not through superstition, but through disciplined awareness. You'll see how daily language becomes a bridge between thought and action, how it can dissolve the fog of indecision, correct patterns of scarcity, and build new habits aligned with abundance. Because to change your life, you don't need more noise, you need precision. You need to learn how to speak with intention to yourself first, and when you do, your world begins to echo back in harmony. Every transformation begins as a whisper, a subtle rearrangement in the inner language you use to describe yourself and your world. It is not a sudden revelation, but the slow recognition that what you say becomes what you live. Classical models of learning call this the law of association. The mind repeats what it believes to be true, and through repetition, that belief takes shape in the body, in choices, and in the invisible network of decisions that compose a life. When we repeat words consciously, we are not simply reciting sounds. We are constructing neural pathways, habits, and new emotional reflexes. Each phrase is a seed, and the soil of the subconscious remembers everything. Ancient teachers understood this long before psychology gave it a name. The monks of Tibet, the Stoics of Greece, the mystics of the desert all used repetition as an instrument of transformation. They did not chant to please the heavens, but to train attention. The act of repeating a phrase brings the scattered pieces of awareness back into one place. It becomes a rhythm that anchors the spirit in the present moment. The word, when pronounced with intention, clears the fog between thought and action. It builds a small bridge, and through that bridge the soul learns to cross from confusion to clarity. Modern neuroscience offers a mirror to this ancient truth. Each repeated word strengthens a network of neurons, and what we practice most becomes the default path the mind takes. If you tell yourself every morning, "I never have enough time," you are not describing a fact, you are rehearsing a belief. The brain memorizes scarcity, and your behavior unconsciously aligns with it. You hurry even when there is no rush. You make decisions from fear instead of presence. The opposite is equally true. When you begin each morning with the deliberate statement, "I have time to move with intention," you are not denying reality. You are shaping it. The words invite the body to slow down, to act with coherence, and that coherence eventually becomes visible in results. There is a silent power in repetition that most overlook. It is not about emotion or enthusiasm, it is about consistency. A farmer does not shout at the soil to grow faster. He waters it daily, at the same hour, with patience. The mind works the same way. Repetition is the watering of the soul. It softens resistance, transforms uncertainty into rhythm, and rhythm into reliability. When you repeat the right words in the right order, you are sending a message to every part of yourself. This is who we are becoming, and the self listens. The timing of repetition also matters. Morning words set the vibration for your decisions. Evening words close the circle, teaching the mind to rest in gratitude instead of fear. Between these two edges of the day lies the field of habit, where action and identity meet. The ancients called it the golden interval, those small windows between thought and movement where we can choose again. In that interval, the phrase you have practiced becomes your compass. You do not have to fight old impulses. You simply follow the new direction you've already carved through repetition. When we speak of changing habits or income or emotional stability, we are really talking about changing attention. Repetition disciplines attention. It pulls it away from chaos and directs it toward intention. Over time, this becomes visible in external circumstances. A person who repeats words of abundance begins to notice opportunities where before they saw none. A person who repeats words of calmness becomes less reactive, even in storms. Repetition re-educates perception, and perception governs every choice. That is why financial prosperity, inner peace, and emotional intelligence are all built on the same foundation, the mastery of inner speech. But mastery does not mean rigidity. True repetition is alive. It breathes, it evolves, it listens. The words you use should feel natural on your tongue, aligned with your essence, not borrowed from someone else's doctrine. When the phrase feels alive, it harmonizes thought, emotion, and action. If it feels empty, it becomes noise. So be patient with your vocabulary of transformation. Let it unfold until each word feels like a mirror of truth, not a command shouted at the universe. The universe responds to resonance, not volume. The greatest mistake people make in this practice is impatience. They repeat a word for a few days, expect miracles, and abandon it when life still feels ordinary. But transformation does not announce itself with fireworks. It creeps in quietly, in the way you respond differently to frustration, in the sudden calm before a decision, in the unexplainable ease with which money begins to flow toward what aligns with your purpose. These are signs that your words have taken root. The soil is working, even if you cannot yet see the harvest. In classical education, repetition was never punishment. It was the path to mastery. The musician repeats scales not to memorize notes, but to internalize harmony. The same principle applies here. By repeating words consciously chosen, you tune the instrument of your being. And when your inner tone aligns with clarity, everything you create, from relationships to income to self-worth, begins to vibrate in that same key. It is not magic, it is coherence. Every word you repeat carries a small act of faith, the belief that change is possible, that consciousness can rewrite what experience has written. That is why language, when treated with reverence, becomes a sacred art. Each sentence is a prayer disguised as discipline. And when that discipline becomes habit, the mind finally learns to rest in alignment. So let repetition be your meditation, your anchor, your architecture. Because when you speak with intention often enough, the day will come when your life begins to sound like your own words. There is an instant, brief but luminous, when thought and action touch one another perfectly. That is the moment of alignment. It is not an idea nor a feeling. It is a vibration of coherence that ripples through every layer of being. Words repeated with clarity open the path to this state. They cease to be mere language and become instruments that tune the internal orchestra. In this alignment, decisions lose their noise, habits settle into rhythm, and abundance stops being a pursuit and becomes a consequence. Human history is filled with traditions that revolved around this principle. The Egyptians carved prayers into stone, believing that permanence in words secured permanence in spirit. The Greeks trained rhetoric not as manipulation, but as a way to discipline thought. The monks of medieval Europe repeated the same psalms daily, not to impress the divine, but to polish the mind into silence. Repetition is the universal ritual of alignment. It gathers the dispersed energies of the human experience, memory, emotion, will, and channels them toward a single direction. When we repeat words consciously, we remind every fragment of ourselves who we are meant to become. Modern understanding of the mind reveals that this process is both mystical and mechanical. Neural circuits respond to rehearsal the same way muscles respond to exercise. Each time a phrase is spoken, it strengthens an electrical pathway, making it easier to follow next time. Slowly, the word moves from conscious effort to subconscious rhythm. This is the birth of habit. What once required focus becomes automatic. What once was discipline becomes nature. Through this, a person begins to act in harmony with the energy they have chosen to affirm. Repetition doesn't create something new out of nothing. It uncovers the dormant structure that was always waiting to emerge. Alignment, however, is not blind faith. It demands awareness of timing. There are hours when repetition echoes with power, and others when it dissolves into noise. Morning repetition sets intention before the world imposes its demands. Evening repetition rewires experience, turning events into lessons instead of regrets. Between sunrise and nightfall, words serve as bridges between choices. They are reminders to return to balance whenever distraction pulls you away. The more deliberate these repetitions become, the more refined the alignment grows, until even the smallest action, like opening an email or making a payment, feels guided by an invisible rhythm of clarity. In alignment, prosperity becomes more than accumulation. It is the evidence of harmony between thought, emotion, and action. A person aligned with their words begins to attract circumstances that resonate with their state. It is not coincidence, it is resonance. Opportunities that once seemed distant start appearing because the mind now filters reality differently. What was invisible becomes visible, not because it suddenly appeared, but because perception finally adjusted to recognize it. The universe has always mirrored our inner vibration. When you change the frequency of your words, you tune yourself to a version of life that was already waiting for you. But alignment also exposes dissonance. It reveals the subtle ways we contradict ourselves. When we say we want peace but repeat words of complaint. When we desire abundance but speak constantly of lack. Each contradiction splits the current, wasting energy that could have been directed toward creation. The discipline of alignment is therefore also the discipline of honesty. Every repeated word should feel true, or at least possible. Otherwise, it becomes resistance disguised as affirmation. The process of refining words is a process of refining self-awareness. You learn not just to speak better, but to live more truthfully. There is a sacred patience required in this journey. Alignment does not rush, it unfolds like dawn. The early light does not argue with darkness. It simply rises until shadows recede. The same is true for those who repeat words of clarity daily. The transformation begins invisibly. A calmer breath here, a wiser decision there. Then, without announcement, entire patterns collapse. Impulsive spending, chaotic schedules, toxic attachments. These dissolve not because you fought them, but because they no longer match your frequency. They fall away like leaves from a tree that has outgrown its season. When alignment deepens, repetition evolves into stillness. The words continue, but they become softer, less like commands and more like gentle reminders. The need to convince yourself fades because belief has matured into knowing. This is the threshold where intention becomes identity. You no longer have to declare, "I am capable." Your presence declares it for you. You no longer have to insist, "I am abundant." Your choices, your tone, your calm awareness broadcast it silently. The repetition has done its work. It has carved the groove through which life now naturally flows. Every tradition has a moment where practice turns into presence. In music, it is when the notes disappear and only melody remains. In spirituality, it is when prayer becomes breath. In the science of manifestation, it is when repetition becomes alignment. You stop chasing outcomes and start embodying principles. Decisions no longer feel heavy because they arise from coherence, not conflict. Habits no longer demand struggle because they are supported by rhythm, not willpower. Even prosperity begins to feel less like pursuit and more like reciprocity, the universe returning what your energy consistently offered. Alignment is not the end of the journey. It is the point from which life truly begins. Once your words, thoughts, and actions move together, the world opens in ways logic cannot explain. You start recognizing timing as guidance, challenges as invitations, and silence as communication. You realize that manifestation was never about forcing reality to obey you. It was about learning to speak the same language as the universe. And the universe, ever patient, responds to those who speak with clarity, rhythm, and heart. In this quiet understanding, you stand at the center of your own creation. You no longer chase what you desire. You resonate with it. You no longer repeat words to convince yourself. You repeat them to remember the truth. This is the real power of alignment. Not domination, not demand, but communion. It is the art of living in harmony with what you speak, until every word becomes a reflection of who you truly are. There is a moment in every person's evolution when understanding becomes embodiment. It is when the words we once spoke as reminders turn into the silent pulse of our being. Repetition has completed its circle, and what once felt like practice begins to feel like nature. This is the essence of transformation through language. the gradual merging of intention and identity. You no longer repeat to convince yourself. You repeat to maintain resonance, to stay tuned to the vibration that sustains your new reality. In this state, life begins to respond with a rhythm that feels unmistakably alive, as though the universe itself has learned to breathe in sync with you. Throughout history, teachers of consciousness have emphasized this stage as the gateway to mastery. The Taoists called it Wu Wei, effortless alignment. The Stoics saw it as virtue expressed without effort, the spontaneous harmony between will and reason. The mystics spoke of grace, the moment when discipline dissolves and truth moves through you without resistance. Yet, all these traditions pointed to the same phenomenon. Repetition transforms belief into reflex. It moves truth from the lips to the marrow, from memory to instinct. The person who once had to recall their affirmations now simply is their affirmation. In classical learning, this process mirrors what scholars call consolidation, the stage where temporary learning becomes permanent memory. Each deliberate repetition signals to the nervous system, this is important. Over time, neurons strengthen their bonds, creating a new default network of perception. Words repeated daily carve fresh trails in the mind until those trails become highways of thought. And once the path is clear, the traveler, your awareness, begins to walk it naturally. What used to require effort becomes the new resting state. You find yourself choosing wisely without hesitation, handling money with presence instead of anxiety, speaking with calm authority rather than fear. The external life aligns with the inner tone. But there is another layer to this truth, a layer that touches the spiritual essence of creation itself. Words are not merely sounds, they are vibrations carrying intention. When spoken consciously, they bridge the visible and invisible. They reorganize energy. The ancient mystics understood that the universe responds not to commands, but to coherence. The frequency of your words must match the emotion and the belief behind them. When all three align, word, emotion, and belief, manifestation becomes inevitable. This is not superstition. It is the natural law of resonance. Every repeated truth sends a signal into the fabric of reality, and reality, patient and precise, begins to echo it back. Still, repetition requires humility. Many abandon the practice too soon, believing that understanding alone is enough. But the mind forgets what it does not revisit. Without repetition, awareness fades, and the old habits return, subtle and persuasive. True transformation demands devotion, not blind devotion to dogma, but to the process itself. The same way a musician practices scales not to perform, but to preserve agility, the conscious being repeats truth to remain lucid in a world that constantly distracts. In this sense, repetition is not about progress. It is about remembrance. You repeat not because you have not learned, but because you wish never to forget. The discipline of daily repetition carries within it a quiet revolution. It teaches patience in an age obsessed with immediacy. It teaches presence in a world of noise. Each time you return to a word or phrase of truth, you affirm your freedom from chaos. You choose meaning over distraction, rhythm over reaction. Slowly, the repetition begins to purify not just your vocabulary, but your perception itself. The world starts to appear more spacious, opportunities more visible, interactions more harmonious. This is the subtle alchemy of language. It does not change reality directly. It changes the one who perceives it, and that shift transforms everything. There will be days when the practice feels hollow, when your words echo against doubt. Those are not signs of failure, but thresholds of integration. The silence between repetitions is as sacred as the sound itself. It is in those pauses that the mind absorbs, the heart aligns, and the unseen begins to move. The soil does not reveal growth every morning, yet life is always stirring beneath. The same applies to your practice. Each repetition nourishes roots that will one day surface as calm decisions, prosperous choices, and steady habits. The transformation is often invisible until it is complete. Eventually, repetition reveals its final gift, awareness of authorship. You begin to realize that you are not merely repeating words, you are scripting existence. Every phrase you have ever spoken, consciously or not, has contributed to the architecture of your present life. And in that realization lies profound responsibility. Once you know that speech creates structure, Carelessness is no longer innocent. To speak negatively is to construct decay. To speak with clarity and reverence is to build light. The art of repetition, then, is not about manipulating outcomes. It is about remembering your role as co-creator of the world you inhabit. When repetition becomes truth, when truth becomes rhythm, and when rhythm becomes presence, you find yourself standing in a new landscape, one where effort gives way to grace. You no longer have to chase transformation, for transformation has become your nature. The words you once whispered in hope now speak through your actions. They guide your breath, your timing, your silence, and in that stillness, you recognize that manifestation was never about calling something to you. It was about awakening what was already within. Every word, every repetition, was a doorway leading you back home to yourself. There is a point in the journey where repetition evolves into something greater than discipline. It becomes transformation itself. This is where the rhythm of the spoken word begins to rearrange not only the mind, but the entire field of life around it. It is the moment when you start to realize that language is not a tool for description, but an instrument of creation. Every word, when spoken with awareness, carries within it a frequency capable of bending perception and shaping the tangible world. The ancients called this the word of power, the vibration through which invisible thought gains form. In truth, transformation has never been a single act. It is the continuous unfolding of repeated truth finding resonance in matter. From the perspective of classical learning, transformation is the natural consequence of internalized repetition. The philosopher Aristotle believed that excellence was not an act, but a habit, a behavior refined through repetition until it became second nature. The same principle applies here. Each word you repeat with conviction becomes part of your identity's structure. At first it feels mechanical, an act of willpower, but as the weeks pass, the repeated phrase ceases to be a practice and begins to express itself spontaneously in your tone, your posture, and your choices. This is the essence of behavioral conditioning in its most sacred form, the shaping of consciousness through language. Neuroscience confirms this invisible alchemy. The brain does not distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and physical reality. When you repeat a sentence such as "I act with clarity and purpose," your neural circuits light up as if that statement were already true. Over time, these pathways strengthen through what psychologists call neuroplasticity, and the statement transitions from a hopeful thought into an operating system. It begins to influence your emotions, your financial behavior, and your capacity for focus. The words you once whispered in uncertainty become the architecture of your confidence. You begin to see opportunities that were always there, but hidden behind your old internal dialogue. Transformation, however, is not immediate. The process unfolds in layers. In the beginning, repetition awakens awareness. It exposes the distance between where you are and what you are affirming. That contrast may feel uncomfortable, yet it is essential. It is the tension that fuels growth, the friction that sharpens understanding. The next stage is integration, where the repeated truth meets resistance from the old self. Habits of doubt, fear, or scarcity will attempt to reclaim control. But if you remain steady in your repetition, the new words begin to override those older programs. This stage demands patience and compassion, for the mind resists change not out of malice, but out of loyalty to what it has known. The final stage is embodiment, the point where repetition no longer feels like effort, but like breath. You have become fluent in the language of your transformation. In this state, words carry an entirely different weight. They no longer serve to describe or justify, they serve to align. A person who has mastered their inner speech radiates coherence. You can sense it in the way they move, in the way they respond rather than react, in the quiet authority of their presence. This coherence is magnetic. It draws circumstances, people, and opportunities that mirror the stability within. Transformation, therefore, is not a mystical accident. It is the natural result of disciplined harmony between word, thought, and feeling. But transformation also asks for discernment. Not every word deserves repetition. The mind is an echo chamber. Whatever is spoken most often becomes the dominant sound. To transform, one must choose words that reflect truth rather than fantasy, precision rather than exaggeration. The most effective affirmations are not grand declarations, but grounded statements that the subconscious can accept as believable. For example, instead of saying, "I am infinitely wealthy," a phrase like, "I am learning to create consistent abundance," builds trust within the psyche. Transformation thrives in realism infused with faith, language that bridges aspiration and acceptance. Across traditions, this balance between spirit and logic has always defined the mastery of language. In the sacred texts of India, the mantra is not a wish, it is a precise formula. Each syllable is chosen for its vibrational accuracy. In Greek philosophy, logos represented both speech and reason, proof that words were seen not as emotion, but as order. And in the early Christian tradition, "in the beginning was the Word," did not refer to sound, but to divine structure, the principle that consciousness organizes creation through intention. Whether through science or spirituality, every culture has discovered the same truth. Repetition of precise, intentional language is the foundation of transformation. At the deepest level, transformation through repetition is an act of remembrance. You are not becoming something foreign, you are returning to your original coherence, the version of yourself unclouded by fear, doubt, and inherited limitations. Each repetition strips away another layer of confusion until the core of clarity emerges. This is why true transformation feels less like conquest and more like coming home. You begin to act, think, and choose in harmony with your essential design. Your words no longer create friction, they restore flow. And that flow, once established, manifests externally as prosperity, emotional balance, and authentic direction. When transformation stabilizes, the individual becomes a transmitter of order. Their words affect others, their presence recalibrates spaces, their silence speaks as clearly as speech. They no longer chase outcomes because they understand that creation begins in vibration, not in force. To transform oneself through repetition is to awaken the ancient art of speaking reality into form, not through manipulation, but through alignment. And that is the quiet power of transformation. It requires no proof, no spectacle. Its evidence is your peace. Its outcome is your freedom. And its method is simple: the daily, deliberate repetition of words that bring you back to truth. There comes a point in every seeker's path when silence says more than repetition, when the words once practiced begin to live on their own. The journey through conscious language leads us here, to the quiet recognition that we were never powerless, only unaware of how deeply our speech shapes our reality. Repetition is not a spell, not a superstition. It is a deliberate act of remembering who we are and reclaiming authorship over what we become. The same phrase that once sounded like aspiration now feels like truth. The same voice that once trembled now resonates with calm conviction. And in that resonance, the boundaries between intention and manifestation dissolve. To understand the mechanics of repetition is to witness the sacred dialogue between mind and universe. The words we speak out loud sculpt the pathways of the brain. The thoughts we whisper silently carve the geometry of experience. Over time, this process refines both intellect and intuition, uniting science and spirit in one simple rhythm. Awareness repeated becomes transformation. When you align your speech with clarity, when your inner vocabulary matches the world you wish to inhabit, life begins to echo back with precision. This is not coincidence, Emma, it is coherence made visible. Transformation through language does not demand perfection. It asks only for consistency and reverence. Each phrase spoken with intention becomes a small act of alignment, and through that alignment you learn to trust the subtle order of existence. You stop chasing what you desire and begin to live as though it is already near. You move from repetition to realization, from discipline to grace. That is the power of words well chosen, spoken with presence, and lived with patience. Language, in the end, is the bridge between thought and destiny. Every sentence carries within it a seed of possibility, waiting for your voice to give it form. Speak with awareness, listen with depth, and let the rhythm of your own truth lead you home. If every word you've ever spoken built the life you live today, what will you choose to say tomorrow? The transformation begins in silence but expands through sound, through the words you dare to repeat until they become who you are. Let this reflection stay with you. If these ideas resonated, subscribe to the channel so you can continue deepening your understanding of conscious language, prosperity, and the science of manifestation. Stay with us. The next video on your screen continues this journey, guiding you further into the art of aligning thought, word, and reality itself.